Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
Before we get started today, I just want to let you guys know that this episode is brought to you by Four Sigmatic Foods. Now, some of you may remember our interview with the founder and CEO of Four Sigmatic, Tero Isokauppila, where we talked about reishi mushrooms, lion's mane, cordyceps, chaga, and tons of other mushroom varieties that you can and should be incorporating into your diet for optimal health. Now, so many of you have reached out and told us how you took advantage of that exclusive 15% discount that we offered and that you really enjoyed the products that we actually wanted to feature Four Sigmatic again on this episode as a sponsor. So to take advantage of that 15% discount code and try some of their highly recommended mushroom supplement products, visit jle.vi/mushrooms. Well, hello, super friends, and welcome to this week's show. Today, we're joined by public speaker and author behind the Amazon bestseller, The 5 a.m. Miracle. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Yes, 5 a.m. is freaking early, but stay with me because as we've learned in so many episodes before, morning rituals are really interesting and important no matter what time you wake up, and our guest has a lot to share about building intentionality into your morning and the reasons why you want to structure your morning in a way that creates the most effective day, however it is that you go out there and crush it, so to speak. So in this episode, we're going to learn how you can better dominate your day by hacking mornings to work in your favor before you even have breakfast. Now, personally, I've really been struggling lately to get out of bed before 7 a.m., and I really want to figure out how I can crack that, how I can dominate the day before lunchtime, and then maybe take the rest of the day off. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see where it goes. So I was really interested in learning some of this individual's strategies for hacking mornings, and I'm a big fan of anything productivity related. So it was great to pick his brain and learn some of his tips and ideas on that. So without any further ado, let me present to you guys Mr. Jeff Sanders of the 5 a.m. Miracle. Mr. Jeff Sanders, welcome to the show, my friend. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
Yeah, pleasure. I have to admit, this is my third podcast recording today, and so I'm energized, focused. The weekend is starting in about 10 minutes for me, 20 minutes. So we're hanging out on the weekend. And I'm feeling very good about that. Yeah. So thanks so much for making the time. I really appreciate it. I know you're a busy guy. You've been up since 5 a.m., I imagine.
Yeah, it's been one of those nice early morning days. So yeah, it's good stuff.
Awesome. So Jeff, tell us a little bit about your story. How is it that you became an expert in the realms of productivity and habits and personal growth? I bet you there's a really great story behind it. So I want to get to that.
Well, I think there's a number of factors. I think that for me, my whole journey began when I graduated college and realized I had absolutely no clue what I wanted to do with my life. And so I moved with my girlfriend at the time, now my wife. We moved to Boston together, and I got a job as soon as I could, the second I got there, in door-to-door sales. And it was the worst job on the planet. I mean, just an awful experience. But my boss told me to read a book from John Maxwell that was a personal development book, and I was just obsessed with it. And I realized at that point that there was a whole world that I didn't know about. And so I began to read like crazy, listen to podcasts, watch documentaries, whatever I could do to learn more. And that is when I realized I wanted to be like the people that I was learning from. That was my real epiphany moment at that point. I was really there's something here. So I wanted to figure out how can I do this for a living? How can I blog or podcast or speak or write books? And so that was my side hustle for many years, was figuring out how to make that happen as I was learning more about myself. And then that just grew until I was able to go full time with it, about 2 years ago. And so now that's what I do, and I absolutely love it. And it's been a really fun journey.
Awesome. So I love that. I hear a little bit of my own story in your story, in that the whole thing was about kind of discovering how you can make it your job to improve yourself and then share that wisdom with other people. So tell us about the 5 a.m. miracle then. We've had Chris Bailey on the show, and I have to admit, when I asked him about what his kind of failed productivity experiments were, he actually admitted that the worst experiment he tried was getting up at 5 a.m. and that it was one of those things that he actually like forfeited on. A lot of stuff stuck. I mean, he still meditates every day, but his worst productivity hack was 5 a.m. So I want to hear what you have to say about 5 a.m. and the 5 a.m. miracle and where that whole idea comes from.
Well, I think that the 5 a.m. thing, fortunately for most people, is that it's totally optional from my perspective. Meaning yes, you can get out of bed at 5 a.m. if you want to, but it's a very arbitrary time. I chose 5 a.m. for myself because about 4.5 years ago now, I was working a day job, I was building my side business, and I was training for a marathon. And I realized I didn't have time for marathon training in the middle of my busy day. So the question was, well, when do I do it? And the only answer I could think of was to wake up early and run before work, which I did not want to do because I was not an early riser at that point. And so I thought, well, as an experiment, I'll just try it and we'll see how it goes. And the very first day I fell in love with it. I realized that I had this opportunity to use time that I didn't know I really had, wake up early, go for a run, kind of dominate my day before breakfast. That was kind of the tagline I created at that point because that's what I was trying to do. And it just stuck with me. It worked so well because I really felt so much better, approaching my day from that perspective. Now, I realize that 5 a.m. sounds incredibly early for a lot of people, and it's totally fine. What I've realized over the years is that it's the intentionality behind that is what makes it work. So you could intentionally get out of bed at 7:30 and still have a very productive day as long as you're being intentional with it. And so it's not a question of when do you get out of bed, but what do you do once you are awake?
Okay. I was going to say, it sounds a little too simple, waking up intentionally and being like, all right, I'm getting up at this time and I'm going to do this stuff. So go into a little bit of detail around that and tell me what you mean by intentionality and what is it that I need to do when I wake up intentionally?
That's a good question. I think that the reality is that I realized that to be intentional meant I had to plan my entire day kind of from scratch. And so if I wanted to wake up early to go for a run, I have to go to sleep early in order to get enough rest. And so I had to kind of backwards plan my day from there. And so I created an 8 p.m. boundary. So at 8 o'clock every night, I'm stopping my work for the day so I can grab a shower, read a book, and be asleep by 9, which gives me a full 8 hours of rest so I can wake up the next morning. And then this is kind of where the 5 a.m. miracle part really kicks in. Is the question of, well, now what do you do at this time? Because just simply waking up early doesn't mean anything by itself. It's using that time for something that means something to you. As a contrast, what I did for many years was wake up at the very last second before I had to be at work. My mornings were very stressful. I was trying to do way too much, way too fast. And I would get to the office just exhausted and out of breath and not enjoying my day already. So to kind of have the better version of that, waking up earlier with a plan allowed myself to say, well, I have a little more flex time now in the morning to do something that is valuable to me. And so what I realized over time was that I wanted my mornings to give me more energy. And so if I could structure my day around that, I would feel a lot better when I got to work. And so I wake up at 5 and do activities that specifically lead to me having more energy, whether that's drinking a lot of water, having a morning smoothie, going for a run. I choose these healthy habits because I want to have a certain kind of experience. And that for me is the miracle, is that I am living the life I want because I'm choosing to do so intentionally, as opposed to just kind of, arbitrarily waking up at the last minute because that's what I've always done. It's taking a step back and asking yourself, what could my morning really look like and what could I do with that time? And you can choose to run or choose to work on a business project or a personal goal. It doesn't matter what you choose to do as long as that thing matters a lot to you and you can actually carve out time in your day for that thing.
All right, so walk me through your morning, because I have to admit, the reason I wanted you on the show today is actually this is something I've really been struggling with. I talk a lot in my courses about getting a good night's sleep. It comes up in my learning course, obviously for the brain benefits. It comes up in my productivity course, how you can sleep. You don't need to sleep 9 hours to get a good night's sleep. And obviously through the podcast, we've done a lot on sleep. What I haven't mastered, I sleep well. What I haven't mastered is actually waking up and feeling energized in the morning. It's so comfy in bed and stuff like that. So walk me through your morning routine. What are you doing, let's say from 5:30 in the morning to, I guess, 10 or 11, or maybe till you break for lunch? And then I want to kind of dive into the getting out of bed stuff. Sorry, I'm all over. But first, walk me through 5:30 to noon, if you would.
Okay, so assuming I've been out of bed for about a half an hour at that point, I am using my first few, let's say the first hour of the day to prep for my morning workout. And so at that point, I'm dressed in my workout clothes. I'm drinking a full liter of water, or at least part of it at that point, and I'm preparing for that run. And so sometimes I'll choose activities before the run, like I might read a little bit of a book, or I might meditate for a little bit, but really I'm trying to get myself out the door as fast as I can. And so once I will do a run, usually about 30 to 45 minutes, come back home, I shower, I'll make a morning smoothie and have that for breakfast. And then from there, I shift into my actual workday, which starts generally around 8:30 to 9. And so the goal for my morning is to say, well, how can I, get that workout in, get all those healthy habits in? So when the workday begins, let's say it's at 9 o'clock, I am, at this point, I've worked out, I've had nutrition, I've had hydration, I've had a little bit of caffeine, I'm dressed, and I'm ready to begin my work. And at this point, I also, during that time of getting ready for the workout, I look at my to-do list for the day. So I've got a very clear idea of what the priorities are for that day. So when 9 o'clock rolls around, I know what my first, most important project is. And for my kind of ideal work schedule and the days this works, I have very dedicated focused blocks of time for the certain high priority activities I want to do that day. And in that focused block, I am cutting all distractions. I am, making sure my dog is not going to bother me, and that my wife is off to work, or if she works from home that day, that she knows I'm in a focused block, and that I have this time where my phone's turned off, my email's turned off, and I'm just doing my key activity for that day. And that leads me up until my lunch period. So that focus block is what makes the biggest difference for me in terms of productivity for the day, because I've kind of carved out that time that says this is when I'm going to get a lot of work done. I'm energized, I'm hydrated, I'm ready to go, and I'm not going to be distracted. And with that in place, it really means I can kind of go to my lunch break feeling really accomplished because I've already gotten a lot done that day.
Got it. Okay. So it sounds like the miracle, so to speak, in the 5 a.m. miracle is really around intentionality, not rushing your morning, going through step by step in kind of a calm way that sets you up, and like not rushing through breakfast, not having to rush through the shower, not having to rush through the workout, but really like creating space to do the things that give you energy and focus throughout the day. Would you say that's fair?
I think for me, that's definitely fair. That's been my perspective on the 5 a.m. miracle for my own experience, is that I like to have that space, and I like to have a slower pace going through the activities, because I contrast that with the stress that I had experienced before, where everything was way too much, way too fast. My wife is kind of the opposite, though. Like, she actually thrives on a very quick routine in the morning, so she does not have a ton of space, but that's the way she likes it. Like, she has a very specific way that she wakes up and does her kind of own mini 5 a.m. miracle, where she's doing the things that allow her to get ready for her day at her own pace. And so there's no specific, tempo you have to have. It's just that question of intentionality as to, this is what's ideal for me, and this is how I'm going to make sure that happens.
Got it. I was actually going to ask, going to bed at 9 and waking up at 5 is all well and good if you're a bachelor or bachelorette. How does it factor in when there's someone else sharing the bedroom?
It's a good question. My wife actually sleeps a lot more than I do. I probably average between 7 to 7.5 hours a night, but she gets probably around 9 hours every night. So she goes to bed before I do usually and wakes up after I do.
Oh,
so
wow.
To that degree, like, she's always asleep when I'm asleep. So I have to be quiet at night and quiet in the morning to make sure I don't disturb her. That's part of my intentionality piece, is making sure that I'm scheduling things that won't disturb her. And that's a big, if you have a roommate, if you have a spouse, if you have someone else, you're in that space, you're working with that other person, is extremely important to make sure that everyone's getting what they need. And so that's been a big part of my journey, is making sure that I'm creating these things that work not just well for me, but works well for everyone that's there.
Got it. And Jeff, what do you say to folks who claim to, quote, not be morning people?
Well, I was not a morning person. So I think that it's totally doable to kind of get into this habit of believing that you are a night owl. And it's so easy to think that that's just who you are. But I think that it's only who you are because that's what you've done. And you can just simply change what you do, and you can change that identity for yourself. And so for me, initially it was kind of this hardcore, tomorrow morning I'm going to get out of bed at 5 a.m., even though I'll be exhausted, and just make it work. That approach is usually too too intense for most people. I think on most occasions, I don't even like that style anymore. And I go for much more of the slower approach. So if your current, wake up time is 7:30, then I would say then tomorrow morning, try 7:15. Just do a little incremental, smaller break where you're getting up a little bit earlier, and then you kind of work your way back to 5 a.m. I think that will help you make that transition to waking up earlier and kind of prove yourself over time that it's totally doable to wake up earlier and still feel great, and to kind of disprove the fact that you think you're a night owl forever. You don't have to be.
Right. Okay. So that's a really good segue into my kind of self-serving question, which is, like I said, I sleep well. I have a really hard time, like so many people, getting out of bed, especially, for those in the audience who control their own schedules, stuff like that. I mean, realistically, I don't really have to be out of bed at a certain time for much of anything. And if it's a, particularly cold morning, it's super hard to get out of bed. So how would you advise going about, breaking the snooze habit in a healthy way, and also creating intentionality and positivity and excitement about getting out of bed in the morning at a specific or early enough time?
Those are great questions. I think that, to approach the alarm clock, I have basically two strategies that I've used. The first one is going to bed super early. So that, let's say, for example, that you want to get, 7 hours of sleep, like a minimum. Then you would go to bed, actually try to be in bed by 8. And if you're in bed at 8 p.m., that's, 10 hours before 5, or sorry, that's 9 hours before 5. And so if you're in bed a lot earlier and you sleep earlier, you get plenty of rest, 5 a.m. is only going to be difficult, and it's only going to be hard to crawl out of bed if you're super tired still and you want more rest. So I found that if I'm really well rested, then I already kind of want to get out of bed. So that helps in terms of that transition. And it may not be possible if your sleep schedule is a little more intense or eating activities are hard, but the more rest you get, the easier it is to get out of bed because you're already rested and ready to go. The second part is that you want to wake up and actually be excited about the first thing you're doing, which then causes you to want to kind of not snooze so much and get out of bed. I definitely like to schedule an early morning run just for that pure sake that I know that if I don't get out of bed at 5 and I delay that process, then it's really likely I'm not going to run at all. And so I know that it's all kind of hinged on that wake-up call, that I get up and I go right away. And that's a super important part, to schedule early morning things that cause you to kind of feel like you have to get up. If you don't have that motivation or a reason to do that, then snoozing is just going to be so natural, and then you're going to start your day later than you actually wanted to. So if anything, that to me, it really helps a lot. I think another piece too, though, is that the more that I work out, the more my body kind of gets adjusted to that early morning workout, and I actually feel kind of antsy in bed, like I want to get up, like my body's physically like saying, hey, it's time to get up now, let's go. And I love the fact that that all kind of works together. So if I wake up and work out and continue that habit, then it's so much easier to maintain that long term and to not want to snooze.
Fair enough. I'm interested because we've had Hal Elrod on the show before talking about the miracle morning. So I'm interested how the 5 a.m. miracle compares or contrasts with his whole miracle morning thing. I mean, I see a lot of parallels. You both are podcasters. You both are publishing books on the power that can be held in morning routines. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, Hal's system actually works really well with any kind of an early morning routine, because the way that he breaks his system down is, you have these kind of 6 steps in the miracle morning, and you can do them whenever, in whatever time frame you want. So like the 6-minute version or the 6-hour version. Like there's a lot of flexibility in how long it lasts. But if you woke up at 5 a.m., you could go through his exact miracle morning system between 5 and 6 or 5 and 7. And so if that's what you want to do with your morning routine, then yeah, it works completely well with that. I love his system. I think it bakes in things that totally align to what things I love: affirmations and reading and exercise and all these pieces that really do give you a great foundation for your day. So to that degree, I think that they really do work well together.
Rock on. So Jeff, tell us a story that has inspired you, one of your readers or someone that you've coached, and what they've been able to achieve with the 5 a.m. miracle.
I actually got an email, this is probably about 2 months ago now, from a podcast listener who said that she began waking up early a year before that email came in. And for the last year, she had been waking up to write a book. She wanted to be a novelist, and she'd never written a book before. And she literally wrote an entire novel just in her morning routine hours. And so she was able to finally get her book, kind of finished. She hasn't published it yet, but she was able to write the entire manuscript in that morning routine. And I realized that like that's exactly what I was hoping for, in that sense that, I spent my morning routine in the beginning, training for a marathon. She used it to write a book. There's so much potential there, so much time you can use. And if you are intentional about it and you have that thing you want to get done, I think it's really obvious to say, well, then the time is there. So just take advantage of it. And then you get those amazing results.
Totally. I mean, I do wake up earlier. I mean, when I say I have difficulty waking up, it's difficulty waking up at 6 a.m., but I'm usually out of bed at 7 or 7:30 at the latest. And that extra half hour or hour has allowed me to develop a daily meditation habit, which is something that I never thought I'd actually crack. But I mean, I've logged hundreds of hours now of meditation just by cracking at it at the morning, every single morning.
Exactly. I love the fact that there's the little small pieces that add up over time. So even just 15 minutes a day will give you a whole lot more success and progress than doing nothing a day. So it's just that, adding in a little bit of those extra habits that work towards your goals. I think that it's really powerful in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jeff, what are some of the other productivity hacks that you find incredibly powerful or that you've used? I mean, you've written a whole book on productivity and you do a whole podcast. Tell us what's come to the surface. What's some of your favorite stuff?
I think one of the things that I mentioned the idea earlier about having focused blocks of time. One of the keys to that is I listen to a certain kind of music during that time. It's from a service called Focus at Will.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a really awesome service. And they create music tracks that are based on neuroscience designed to make your brain focus. So the music tracks that they provide are intentionally designed so that when you hear it, you're actually not hearing the music and your brain is able to center in on what you're doing, which I have found to be so beneficial. I literally use that service every single day when I'm working because it works so well. And in the past, what I had done was listen to music that I enjoyed, or over time, I realized I liked to listen to techno while I was working. I realized I liked the techno music because of that reason. Like, it was giving me that kind of focal benefit. Like, my brain was using that in that way. But now this service exists that has music tracks that designed just for that. And so for me, it's a no-brainer now. I want to use that because I want to get that kind of focus when I'm working. And it's incredible how much more I get done when I'm not distracted, and how much more I'm able to look at the quality of my work that improves, and how much more I get done in a smaller time frame. And so whatever I can do to reduce distractions and focus for me is really huge.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anthony Mativier, a previous guest that we've had on the show and a good friend of mine, has tried to convince me on this thing, but I've never really gotten into it. I think I need to give it another look, really pay closer attention to it, because he swears by it.
Oh, definitely. I think that's one of those things where once you kind of find your station on there that you like, you're going to be hooked forever. Because I've got 2 stations on there that I use consistently. There's probably 12 or 13 others that I don't use at all. But depending on what you prefer to listen to while you work, there's a lot of variety there. There's even stations for people who have ADHD, those who like classical music, or if you like acoustic music, or if you like more of the techno house style. They're all there, and they all work really well.
That's awesome. I'm going to check that out. I've been laboriously building a Spotify playlist that gets the same goals, but it takes a lot of time and effort to curate. So I think I'm going to check that one out. Yeah,
definitely. That's a good call.
Jeff, I know one of your big messages is really about pursuing dreams and structuring your life around goals. I'm actually a really, really big advocate of that myself. I just recently released a course with one of my mentors around creating a life of meaning and building goals into your daily thinking. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on goals, setting them, and also how people can go out and get what they want in life.
It's a great question, because goal achievement has been on my mind for years. I think that once I kind of discovered personal development, back after I graduated college, I realized there were a lot of things I wanted, and I wanted to figure out kind of how to structure my life to make those things possible. And the 5A Miracle just kind of amplified that. But what I've been doing over the last few years is focusing a whole lot more, having a much smaller list of things I want to do that I'm going to commit to. And so one of those strategies is that I use what's called a quarter system, where basically instead of looking at my goals in a whole 12-month, full year-long plan, I look at my life in just 3-month chunks and ask myself, well, in this next quarter, what are my absolute top priorities that I'm going to commit to? And then everything else is going to be delayed till later, or just cancel it completely. And with that kind of focus, I may only have 1 or 2 goals for the quarter, but I'm completely focusing my entire life around those things. And then that provides so much more progress and so much more ability to be clear on what you're doing, because you're not allowing yourself to be distracted with 1,000 things. So I think it's one of the biggest problems that entrepreneurs have, or people who have just tons of ideas of things you want to do. You can't do it all. Like, you cannot pursue everything you want to do. And making those cuts, as hard as it is what allows you to be able to achieve the most important goals that matter to you a lot. I think determining what matters to you takes some practice and experimentation. But once you've nailed down a few things you are confident that you want, carving your life around those things and crafting your life in a way that says, this is going to get my attention all the time, well, then you actually make progress. And then you begin to see those dreams become real. And to me, that's such a powerful thing. I love seeing the results that I get when I focus on something exclusively.
Yeah, absolutely. I struggle because I do 20 goals every 6 months. And I struggle to narrow it down. Like, for me, I like having them, but then again, they're also so varied. They're everything from take piano lessons to increase my overhead squat to, release a new course. So there's a lot of variety and stuff like that. Professionally, though, I definitely see the value, and I have like one focus goal per half year. So my focus goal right now is outsourcing more of my business, delegating more so that I'm working less and focusing on areas of life that are going to kind of provide more value to me, like starting a family, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I know that I have a long list of things that I want to pursue in the future. Some of those things will sneak into my kind of life, kind of on accident. But in general, having kind of that main thing, like I'm working towards this one overarching goal, I think provides ability to filter, to know does this activity today help me move towards this goal or not? By asking those kinds of questions, I've realized, I'm doing things that are actually distractions, and I need to cut this or delay it or postpone it so I can get to the thing that matters more. And it's definitely an art form. It takes some time to get really good at, but the more that I, ask those kinds of questions and really focus, the easier it is for me over time to be able to stay on track for the things that I really want to do the most.
Awesome. What are your current goals right now? What are you working towards?
There's 2 big things in my life right now I'm working on. The first is public speaking. And so as a part of kind of my book launch that I had back in December, I'm trying to establish more of who do I want to speak to and how often do I want to speak, and pitching those companies and going out and talking. So that's been kind of an amplified goal the last few months. And then the second one that I'm actually currently super excited about is minimalism. And so I'm looking through my entire life and asking those same kinds of questions. How can I do less and achieve more? Or how can I own fewer things or get rid of stuff? And that has been such an eye-opening experience for me, because I realize that I own way too much stuff. I am pursuing way too many things. There's way more going on than there needs to be. And so if I can find ways to cut that clutter, then it's going to make my life that much better. I mean, I'm applying these principles to everything from the landscaping in my house to the website that I'm trying to make more simplistic. I mean, it applies to every area of my life. But those same kinds of questions of how can I do less and achieve more, it applies so well to everything, and I'm finding it to be so helpful to ask those kinds of questions. Right.
Absolutely. I'm completely on board with you. I wanted to ask you, what are some tools that you're using? I mean, I always swear by Asana. I swear by Evernote. I know you and I both use Skype extensively. What are some tools that are making you more effective and more productive in your daily work?
Well, very similarly, I love Evernote. I use that all the time. And instead of Asana, I use a program called Noseby, which is very similar. The digital task manager that allows me to organize all of my to-dos and my calendar, and everything's built into that. And Noseby really, for me, has become it's my go-to for everything. I put all of my tasks in there, all of my projects, everything I'm working on. And that's where I operate out of every single day, is trying to establish what that priority list looks like and what I'm going to commit to and what I'm not going to commit to. And so for me, that is the one most important tool I'm using constantly, in addition to Evernote and Google Drive for a lot of my file storage.
Cool. Nozbe.com, Noseby?
Yes, exactly.
Cool. I'm going to check it out. I'm going to check it out for sure. You mentioned minimalism, which made me think of Marie Kondo. I know her book is exploding right now, which then made me think, what are some thought leaders? Who are some thought leaders or kind of books that you're a fan of?
There's a bunch of them. I think recently, along the same lines of minimalism, there's 2 books that I read probably 2 years ago that I'm now rereading. The first one is The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan, which is an awesome book all about doing just one thing that matters most. And the second one is Essentialism by Greg McKeown. And both of those books have probably the same message, just using different words to describe it, which is just kind of back to the idea of minimalism. Like you're just narrowing your life down to the fewest things that matter most and figuring out how to wrap your life around those concepts. I think that there's a lot of different perspectives on doing less. And so I love to read all those different books that really point to that same idea that these kinds of things matter. And so I think that that's in business and in life, like those principles they always apply. They're always great.
That's fantastic. So Jeff, you're focused mostly on the podcast, or you're still doing the promotions of the book? I mean, what's the big goal you're trying to take away professionally from 2016? I assume it's successful launch of the book.
The launch of the book is definitely kind of where the year began, and then I'm converting that into public speaking as well. I use the podcast as kind of like a marketing tool for everything else I'm doing. But yeah, sure. The book launch plus public speaking is kind of as the year is progressing, that's becoming the main focus for sure.
And what's the format of the podcast? I mean, what can people expect to check out on there? It's interviews or?
Yeah, I alternate between interviews and doing shows where it's just me. And so I'll usually alternate back and forth, and every other week's a different kind of format. And so I'll bring on a guest and I'll talk to them about the same kinds of things with productivity, healthy habits, personal development. And then the episodes where it's just me, I'll take those same kinds of categories, but dive into a specific lesson and talk about something that has worked really well for me or something that's not worked really well, and then how that all breaks down. So I just it's 30 to 45 minutes per week, and I try to make sure that I provide as much actionable takeaways as possible. That's been one kind of major focus in the book and the podcast is, when you finish listening to some content, you're going to have action steps, something to go do that next day. And I think that has really allowed me to be more intentional about what I'm producing. And then the audience can leave saying, well, I know what to do now. And I think that's really helpful.
Brilliant segue into my next question, which is, if we were to assign a piece of homework for this episode for people to do while they wait for next week's episode, what would you like that piece of homework to be?
I would say plan tomorrow on paper tonight. And that sounds very simple, and that's the whole point, is that you're going to, if you don't already have a really well-crafted plan for what you're going to do tomorrow morning, then start with that. You can handwrite it and put it in Evernote, wherever you want to do it, but be very intentional about specifically when you're going to get up, what you're going to do next, what that means to you, knowing exactly how that day is going to be laid out. And then, the following day, do the same thing, but do it better. And have that routine continue for the next week if you want to, doing that every day, of being a little more intentional, a little more planned, so that you can get the very most as possible out of your morning.
Fantastic. Jeff, if people want to learn more or get in touch with you, where should we send them?
JeffSanders.com is the website. And of course, the 5A Miracle podcast is on iTunes, and the 5A Miracle book is on Amazon.
Awesome. And we will link all that stuff up in the blog post for this episode. Jeff, I want to close on one kind of special question, which is, if people take away one lesson from this episode and carry it with them for the rest of their lives, what would you hope for that lesson to be?
I would say to be intentional. Regardless of what you choose to do it on purpose. And I think that is something that I have struggled with, because it's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day. It's so easy to just keep doing what we've been doing, but to actually pause and think about, why am I doing this, and how can I do this better, or how can I not do this at all? That intentionality behind that provides such immense benefits. So if anything, take your life seriously and do it on purpose. And when you do that, you get phenomenal results.
That's a fantastic note to close on. Jeff Sanders, thank you very much for sharing your time with us. I know you've been up since 5 a.m., so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, do keep in touch.
Yeah, definitely. We'll do.
All right, super friends, that's it for this week's episode. We hope you really, really enjoyed it and learned a ton of applicable stuff that can help you go out there and overcome the impossible. If so, please do us a favor and leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or however you found this podcast. In addition to that, we are always looking for great guest posts on the blog or awesome guests right here on the podcast. So if you know somebody, or you are somebody, or you have thought of somebody who would be a great fit for the show or for our blog, please reach out to us either on Twitter or by email. Our email is info@becomingaSuperhuman.com. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.